First of all, I would like to thank the Black Tech Festival for this kind invitation, and it's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Norhan Mahmoudi, and I am a youth advocate and a policy and advocacy advisor at the European Network Against Racism. And today I will be speaking about advocacy and campaigning for youth activists. But before digging deeper into the topic itself, I would like to introduce the organization I'm working in. ENAR stands for the European Network Against Racism, and we are an organization that is a pan-European network of almost more than 150 organizations that work on different topics in relation to racial equality and anti-racism and so on. And ENAR was established in 1998, and the mission is to really combine racial equality and racial justice and advocacy tools to advocate for better legislation when it comes to racial justice, particularly in the context of the European Union. Obviously, when it comes to, as I mentioned, the objective and the purpose of the organization, ENAR works to put an end to structural racism and discrimination across Europe and make a real difference in ethnic and religious minority lives. And so the topic that I would like to speak about today is about advocacy and campaigning, particularly when it comes to youth activists. These terms, advocacy, campaigning, and lobbying, in the realm of activism, they are most of the time confused with one another. And so the idea in this very little time that we have today is to make a little bit of clarity around the term, around the understanding of campaigning, lobbying, and obviously advocacy. So when it comes to the terms themselves, campaigning, advocacy, and lobbying are a range of tools, mechanisms, initiatives, processes, and or organized actions to initiate and promote change in policies, programs, and or spending. And obviously, I think we need to take into consideration that although they have the similar aim of bringing about a change in society, in legislation, and so on, it's very important for us to understand that they have different processes and different target audiences. So to understand these nuances, obviously we see, for example, that advocacy is actions that aim to change attitudes, policies, and practices, and it can be understood from a long-term perspective. So when we think about advocacy, we're thinking about a long-term societal, institutional, structural, and systemic change. If we think about lobbying, lobbying has the same purpose, but it's more of a strategic, formal, or informal means of influencing specific decision makers on a specific issue. So it is more, it can be understood more of efforts and endeavor at an institutional level. Lastly, we have campaigning, which can be considered as one of the tools of advocacy, and it can be defined as actions, events, and activities to achieve a change and to raise issue working more widely across organized groups or people. All of these, as I mentioned, lobbying and campaigning particularly can be considered part of advocacy because advocacy is more broader as a concept. So they are included within this, we would say, wider process. And so we could also see it here, for example, saying that the aim of advocacy, lobbying, and campaigning is similar, but the process is different because it also depends on the target audience. It also depends on the identification of the issue, of the problem, and the solutions that we would like to utilize and to identify to reach the change that we expect to reach. And so it can be seen as well as advocacy, campaigning, and lobbying. The point that I would like to speak about, though, is why youth advocacy is critical. When we think about discrimination, when we think about racial justice, when we think about minorities and vulnerable communities, most of the times one of the grounds of discrimination that is overlooked or that we forget is being a young person, being a youth, part of the youth, let's say, community. And it's something that is overlooked. If we think about nowadays society, it's already difficult to be a young person because there are already many societal, systemic, and structural difficulties and barriers that we encounter simply, for example, in accessing the job market or within the education system, let alone if this young person belongs to a minority or has a racialized background. This means that the discrimination is even multiplied and it has a heavier impact on the life of the young person. And so we also, I think most of us that are sitting here have heard about this quote a lot. Young people are the future. But I think it is obviously a cliche, and I think we have to look beyond it because at the same time, young people are not only the future, they are not just the future, but they are the present too. Meaning that it's very important that we take into consideration the impact and the power that is embedded in the potential of young people. What we are missing as young people is simply the tools, capacity building activities, and given the ability or the possibility to sit at the table where decisions that are impactful, decisions that impact our lives as young people take place. This is what the problem when it comes to youth engagement and youth advocacy is. And so we could also say that youth advocacy is beacon for sustainable change. These young people, or nowadays young people, will one day become the senior generation. And because of the experience that they pass or the experience that they go through, they would kind of like implement or execute or be inspired by the way that the senior generation at the time has treated them, right? And even like the politicians or the decision makers. So it's very important that we really establish mechanisms of youth engagement. We give young people the platform that they deserve. We give them the opportunities that they deserve to actually be given the possibility to be a change in the society in which they live in. But we also have to consider that youth advocacy is exciting. I personally consider it, as a youth advocate, I personally consider it as a privilege sometimes, because not everybody is given the possibility, for example, to speak on a stage or to go and protest or simply create a campaign or be invited in institutional meetings and these sort of kind of like opportunities. For me, it is a privilege, but at the same time, it does not mean that it's easy. Meaning that there are challenges, there are issues, and there are difficulties that we have to overcome even in this type of place. And some of those difficulties and barriers that I have highlighted, as you can see, we have structural, systemic, and institutional barriers and discrimination. Nowadays, when we think about, the EU or when we think about Europe, there are many issues and many communities, obviously, that go through a lot of different and multi-layered types of discrimination, whether that's accessing the labor market, the higher education system, or simply public life. And this is one of the, we would say, challenges and difficulties that we encounter as young people from racialized background. The second, I would say, challenge is about accessibility and inclusivity. I mentioned that youth activism or advocacy or whatever we would like to define it, because it really depends on our personal experiences, the lived experience too. It is something that is a privilege, meaning that there are also issues of accessibility. Most of the times we're not invited to those tables. Most of the times we're not included in those important discussions where the decisions that are made in those discussions, whether that's institutional discussions or, for example, student unions or even like at universities and so on, doesn't mean that it is, we shouldn't take for granted the fact that we need to be invited to those type of conversations and discussions. Another issue related to accessibility and inclusivity is also the resources. Most of these organizations or most of these youth activists or advocates, they operate as volunteers, meaning that they don't only have volunteering within their, let's say, their context in their life, but they also have, for example, studying, or they have work, meaning that resources when it comes to this particular type of advocacy and activism is very important for them to operate in a way that is impactful and a way that is really engaging and that would bring about a change. The last challenge that I would like to mention is about visibility and erasure. And I would say it summarizes the previous two challenges, because the type of work that youth activists or advocates from a racialized background they do, it's not necessarily always visible, because exclusion, it's also invisibility. If we think about the media, if we think about interviews or kind of like the overall media platforms, it's very important that us as racialized communities and minorities have control of our own narrative, because most of the times we will find our personal stories, we will find the stories of our communities that are told in the media, but we were not even questioned, we were not even asked about our own piece and about our own story. And this is an issue of visibility. Now, I would like to bring a case study for you. So if we think about youth activism, one of the most kind of like clear examples and most, most important examples is youth activism in climate change. And when I speak about climate change, Greta Thunberg is one of the most important figures because she really has created this kind of like movement called Fridays for Future that had a lot of Fridays for Future that we would say mobilized a global movement all across the world. But what I would like to bring to your attention is this picture. So this picture was taken in a conference about climate activism in Switzerland a few years ago. And obviously you could see Greta Thunberg and other activists in this picture. But I would like to ask a question to the audience, and please raise your hand if you know what's the issue with this picture. Okay. So the original picture, it is not this one. The original picture is this one. And so the activist, the black activist that is standing, sorry, I did not put it forward. Okay. It's not working, the clicker. Oh, now it's working. So the picture that you can see here is the original picture. And so you can see that the black activist was cropped out of the picture. Her name is Vanessa Nakate, and she's a youth activist in the context of climate change and climate activism from Uganda. And her picture, basically she was cropped out of the picture of an international conference that took place in Switzerland just because she was black. And obviously, the news agency apologized for that, and they essentially explained that it is not within their policy to omit and to exclude people. But this is the reason that I'm bringing this picture is an example of how even within the youth activism sector, discrimination are real, racism is real, and it can be faced. And so you can see that these type of instances and these type of racist episodes impact the work of the youth activism. In the words of Vanessa, she said that she had not understood the concept or the experience of racism before this episode. And so I think we can all reflect on this, and we can all identify the importance of solidarity building mechanisms as well. Because yes, it's true, it's important that as racialized communities, as minorities, as young people, it's important for us to learn how to be outspoken. It's important for us to learn those skills to execute effective advocacy. But at the same time, if racism exists today, it doesn't mean that it's only about the minorities and it's only about the racialized communities, meaning that it's not only their responsibility to speak up. It's the responsibility of the entire society, it's the responsibility of the institutions. And when things like this happen, we need to be able to speak up, we need to be able to be outspoken and to reclaim our own narrative. And so, normally this type of presentation, it's also a training that I normally deliver called Campaigning 101, and it takes up to at least 3 hours. But because we do not have 3 hours today, I would like to highlight some of the important tools that are used to train youth activists and to train young people when it comes to campaigning and advocacy. And please feel free to come to me later and I'm happy to speak about them in detail. So one of the essential tools in the context of activism is understanding how to build a campaign and understanding how to build the structure of a campaign. What you can see here is a simplified version of the structure of the campaign. So how do we start and how can we build a campaign from scratch? First of all, we have to identify the problem. We have to identify the issue. What is the issue? What is the problem that we are facing? Because most of the times there are certain questions that we forget to ask of ourselves because we are in the lust of it all. We're trying to build activities, we're trying to organize events, but we forget about what is the problem and what is the issue that we want to address. The second step after identifying the problem is identifying the impact, the change that we would like to achieve. And here it comes the important phase of identifying the goals and the objectives of the campaign. Because certain issues do not require a campaign. Certain issues can be solved with a closed-door meeting or a different type of a solution. And so it's very important for us to understand when do we launch a campaign and when it is not really a solution to launch the campaign. The third important thing is obviously the target audience, meaning that campaigns in general, whether that's a social media campaign or whether it could be even activities that we can organize for a particular cause. And I would like to remind you that campaigning is not about long-term objectives or a long-term perspective. It's more about short-term objectives and short-term perspective, meaning that it's an issue that we would like to resolve in short, medium-term perspective. And so it's very important to identify the target audience. And how do we do that? Is by basically seeing what the objectives and analyzing the objectives that we have identified and analyzing for who we are trying to kind of like implement that type of change and who are we trying to address with this campaign. And an important kind of like tool, and we will see it a little bit later, is stakeholders management. When we identify stakeholders management for us, then it's going to be easier to identify the target audience of a particular campaign that we're organizing. And so the last thing, and I said this is a very kind of like simplified version of what normally this training is. After we identify the problem, and then after that the objectives, the change or the impact that we would like to achieve, after identifying the target audience, the last thing is about the activities. And the question that we ask ourselves here is, how can we achieve this objective? Which activity is more impactful and more effective for me as an advocate, for me as an organization, to achieve this particular objective or objectives? So after identifying the kind of like showcasing the structure of the campaign, there are also some recommended roles that we can highlight. First of all, if you are launching a campaign, it's important that you identify a lead. Even if you are in a team, sometimes in moments of crisis management as well is another important kind of like a skill that is really crucial and fundamental when it comes to activism, because crises happen all the time, and it's important for us to identify a lead that will give the executive decision, that will consult its team members, but it will also kind of like give the direction and the directions and the decisions when it comes to this particular context. And so after that, we would also have a role of logistics. If we're organizing an event, or if you're organizing a roundtable, let's say, it's important that you have someone that can take care of the logistical part of your campaign. Stakeholders lead, we'll speak about stakeholders management shortly. A research lead. Why is it important? Because if you do not know your past, you cannot know the future. Meaning that if we're trying to address a particular cause, if we're trying to address a particular issue, it's very important to somehow understand the background, understand the context, whether the political, economic, societal context, but also see if there are other organizations and other entities that are already operating. And this is the reason why a research lead is important. A spokesperson, this is related to media training as well. When it comes to campaigning, it's very important that we understand the importance of reclaiming our narrative and amplifying the voices of marginalized communities and racialized communities also in media. And not everybody can be a spokesperson. So it's very important that we somehow have trained people and trained individuals in those particular roles that can operate as a team. Last but not least, we also need a comms individual, so a social media manager or someone that handles the comms strategy for your campaign. Now, another important tool that I would like to highlight is about the messaging. So if we are developing a campaign, it is absolutely crucial that we have, I would advise, one message. Because if we create multiple messages with several target audiences, the campaign will not be as impactful as having one single message that is clear, concise, and coherent. And obviously, like, I think this is a quote that I wanted to share, and that I wanted to share because it's very important to understand the concept of identifying a message that is clear, concise, and coherent, is that the bait should catch the fish and not the fisherman. And now when it comes to the media team, these are also kind of like recommendation to when it comes to the specific aspects of the media strategy. But again, because we don't really have a lot of time, I'm going to skip this, and please come to me later if you would like to have more details about this. Now, we've spoken about the media, we've spoken about the narrative, and something that is important to understand and to remember is that the public opinion is your narrative. Meaning, you know, we're seeing all of us what's happening nowadays with kind of like the politics and so on. The media is used as a platform and as a space to transmit and to share and to convey particular messages. And it's something that we cannot overlook as civil society organization. It's something that we cannot overlook as youth activists, which is very important for us to understand how the media realm works and how we can better and more effectively in an impactful manner convey our messages. And remember this, entire countries and causes have had their ambitions thwarted or aided as a consequence of their trials in the court of public opinion. Now, stakeholders management. Again, that's another tool that I wanted to bring from the training that we normally deliver. It's very important to understand the different stakeholders, because we can have in our spectrum of allies, which is another tool that is related to stakeholders management, we can have different tools and we can have different somehow entities and allies that we need to take into consideration and we need to interact with to make our message more powerful, to make our impact within the work that we are delivering more powerful. So there are some stakeholders that we need to satisfy, other stakeholders that we need to manage, other stakeholders that need to be monitored, and other stakeholders that need to be informed. Now, to come to a conclusion, I would like to say that when it comes to youth activism, it is very important that we understand that youth and young people are not only a recipient of knowledge. They are active individuals, they are active communities that want to contribute to the change and that want to contribute to societal change. And they shouldn't be, as a young person, and if I'm speaking as well to the audience, if you're not given a seat at the table, request it, demand it, and advocate for it. Because the decisions that are made in the institutions are decisions and policies that impact our life, and it's really very important for us that we have a seat in this table and that we are able to advocate for ourselves, for the minorities, for the racialized communities, for us to be able to promote, values that we believe in, such as justice and racial justice. Thank you very much for your time. I know we have just a few minutes left, so if there are any questions, I can take some questions. Otherwise, I'm happy to conclude. Or even any comments if anybody would like to add anything to this. Okay, thank you very much for your time. And please feel free to reach out to me, I'm around. Again, I would like to thank Black Tech Festival for the time that was given to us, and see you. Bye-bye.